Okay, good evening, everyone. We are going to continue a Gemara we started last week. So last week, we spoke a little bit about Purim. But we got into a little bit of the tractate Megillah. We spoke a little bit about the difference between the hatred of Haman and the hatred of Achashverosh and what that means to us. But the Gemara over here, the Talmud and Megillah, maybe, as I said last week, when we get closer to Purim, we'll go through the story of Purim in depth, according to the Talmud, with all the Midrashim. But there is a interesting statement in the Talmud here, which talks about the prophets and the prophetesses of the Jewish people, the male and female prophets of the Jewish people. So here's a little bit of Jewish trivia challenge for you. How many prophets can you name offhand? Before we get to the female prophets, how many prophets can you name among the Jewish people? What's that? Well, I'm not trying to understand. 13? You get 13? There's two things. One is how many? And this next question is, can you name them? You mentioned Yeshaya. That's one. Who are the prophets of the Jewish people? What's that? Eov. I don't know if Eov's listed. That's interesting, because some say Eov is not a person. Eliyahu, that's two. We've got two. Yosef. Yosef is not listed as a prophet. Miriam is, yes. Let's talk about the men first. So far we have two or three. Yitzchak, yes. Anyone else? Any other names? Feel free to unmute yourself. We've got three prophets listed.
Yirmiyahu,
yes.
Heskia.
Is not listed. Nope.
Haggai.
I missed that. We're looking for more. We've got four.
Haggai.
Choppy, I'm sorry. Roberto, the audio is not great.
Daniel.
What's that?
Daniel.
Daniel. Yeah, Daniel is a prophet. Why is he not listed? Why doesn't Rashi list him? I don't know. Okay. Well, let me just say this. There are 48 prophets. We've got four. 4 of 48. Hello, welcome. So we're at 4. We got a ways to go. All right, let me first read the Gemara. Nehemiah. Someone mentions Nehemiah. Yeah, that is correct. Okay. So we're at about 5. Habakkuk, that's 6. Very good. Let me Hosea. See, now we're moving along. Thank you, Roberto. So let me read the Gemara. The prophets of the Jewish people. And what is prophecy after all? What is prophecy? Well, maybe we'll touch upon that too. Today we're going to be talking about prophets and prophetesses, despite the fact that we stand now in a non-profit organization, synagogue. We are going to talk about the prophets of the Jewish people. We're going to share some fascinating stories because the prophets are relatively known. The prophetesses are less known. Thank you, David, but someone did mention Eliyahu already, Elijah. So, let's read the Gemara. Says the Gemara. Tractate Megillah, 14a. Tana Rabbanan, our sages taught. Arba'im u'shmona neviim, 48 prophets of the Jewish people. V'sheva neviot, and 7 prophetesses, female prophets. Nisnabu lahem liYisrael, all prophesied to the Jewish people. But I'm sorry, let me go back a little bit. Similar thing. Amar Rabbi Bar Kana. Rabbi Bar Kana says, Gedola hasaras taba'as. the removal of the ring was more powerful than the 48 prophets and 7 prophetesses who prophesied to the Jewish people. Because the 48 or the 55 prophets were unable to really cause the people to repent properly, but the removal of the ring did the job.
Question.
What removal of the ring is what are we talking about over here? Which removal of the ring is more powerful than the prophets and prophetesses? Once this reminds me of a joke of 2 women who are talking to each other, and one of them says to the other, I heard you're engaged to, I don't know, David. How's that going? She said, no, that engagement is off. My feelings towards David have changed. She says, that's a shame. Did you return the ring? She said, no, my feelings towards the ring have not changed at all. So the removal of the ring somehow is more powerful than all 55 prophets. What's the story of the removal of the ring? The story of the removal of the ring is a Purim, part of the Purim story. If you read through the Megillah, the story of the removal of the ring is that at some point in the story, Haman goes to Achashverosh, and Haman says to Achashverosh, there is a nation, and it's a strange nation, and they're spread out, and they follow their own rules, and they're just a pain in the neck, and therefore, if it's okay with you, I'd like to get rid of them. And in fact, as a little gift to you, I will give you a Aseres Alafim Kikar Kesef, 10,000 silver bars of silver bars. And what happens next in the Megillah? Vayasar HaMelech es tabato. The king Achashverosh removes his ring, his signet ring. That was the ring which would sign any decree. He removes it and says, here, take it, sign whatever decree you want, and keep your money. I don't need your money. So go ahead and sign any decree to destroy the Jewish people, which basically put into effect Haman's decree to destroy the Jewish people in one day, which is a major part of the Purim story. That removal of the ring is a critical point, because until then, it's only Haman's idea. Until then, it's only Haman's plan. As soon as the king removes his ring and says, now you can do whatever you want, that removal of the ring symbolizes an idea being brought into action or into a real plan. And what's the response of the Jewish people to that? A international, the entire nation repents, does tshuva. They fast, they pray, they reconnect. So the Gemara is saying that 55 prophets came and went. 55 prophets. The goal of a prophet was to inspire the Jewish people, to awaken their hearts, to warn them, to cajole them. So the Gemara says the 55 prophets, they had some success, but none were as successful as the removal of the ring. The Jewish people felt the threat of annihilation with the removal of the ring of Achashverosh. That caused a universal repentance and connection that none of the prophets accomplished.
I have a question.
Go for it.
So is that why Daniel's not listed in the Rashi, because he didn't actually give over like a prophecy to, like, in public in the same way like Yeshayahu?
Right. So it's important to point out that you have many holy people in the Jewish people. There's the word for a holy person in Judaism is a tzaddik. A tzaddik is a righteous person. That's different than a prophet. A prophet is one who has a message to then convey to the Jewish people. I am still a little bit surprised as to why Daniel is not there. You have the book of Daniel. So I don't know. I don't know. It's a little bit surprising to me. Anyway, but this Gemara, as an aside, alludes to the fact that we have 55 prophets, 48 male, and 7 female prophets. Who are they? So before we went around and we collected about 10 names. So we're a little bit short of the 48. And who are the female prophets? Who are the 7 female prophets? Let's move on to the Gemara for a moment, and then we'll get to them. Tanu Rabbanan, another statement along the lines of the prophets. Abraham Mishmona Nevi'im, you had 48 prophets, the Sheva Nevi'os, and 7 prophetesses, Nisnabu Lehem Yisrael, who prophesied to the Jewish people. And at no point, even though they were prophets and they had messages to convey, at no point do the prophets add or diminish any part of Torah? This is very important because we have the 613 biblical commandments, 248 positive commandments, 365 negative commandments, 248 you should, 365 you should not. And the prophets never added or subtracted from the Torah. They were there to simply inspire the people to follow in the ways of the Torah, with the exception of one circumstance. There was one circumstance in which something was added to the Torah, and that was Mikra Megillah, the story of Purim. The entire holiday of Purim was established by the prophets. No other, all the other holidays come from the Torah. When you think of the holidays, you think of Passover, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot. Those are all from the Torah, from the Bible. The exception is the holiday of Purim, which comes from the prophets. And the other exception is the holiday of Hanukkah, which we're about to start. But that's after the prophets. The story of the Hanukkah is the last Jewish holiday to be established, is the holiday of Hanukkah. It is the last of all the holidays we have. But that's after the prophets. From the era of the prophets, we have one new mitzvah, and that's the mitzvah of Purim. Okay, so this is just another source to the idea that we have 48 prophets, 7 prophetesses. Who are they? So before we asked and we got a few answers, let me read them. They're in the Rashi, and I will now enumerate to you the 48 prophets of the Jewish people. And they are Abraham. No one said Abraham. Abraham was a prophet. That's the first statement in the Torah of prophecy is by Yomer Hashem al Avraham lech lecha. God spoke to Abraham saying, travel. That's pretty clear prophecy right there, right? You have Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. All right, here's a name that nobody mentioned. Moses. There you go. Moses was a prophet. There was no other prophet like Moses. We are very much dependent on the prophecy of Moses. Moshe was a prophet. His brother Aaron was a prophet. Moshe's successor, Yehoshua, was a prophet. Yeshua's successor, Pinchas, was a prophet. All right, then we get to some names which are understandably less known. Elkanah. Elkanah was a prophet. Elkanah was the husband of Hannah. Eli, the high priest, Eli was a prophet. Samuel was a prophet. Gad was a prophet. Not the God of the 12 tribes, a different God. Nasan, we come across Nasan Hanavi. King David is considered to be a prophet. King Solomon is considered to be a prophet. Perhaps one of the least known is a prophet named Iddo. Michaahu ben Yimla. Ovadia is a prophet. Achia Hashiloni is a prophet. Yehu is a prophet. Azariah is a prophet. Chaziel is a prophet. Eliezer ben Dodavahu. Hosea, which I think was mentioned. Amos. Micha. Amots. Eliyahu Hanavi, that was mentioned. Elisha, the disciple of Eliyahu Hanavi. Yonah, the story of Yonah and the whale, which we read about every Yom Kippur. He was a prophet. Yeshaya was a prophet. Yoel was a prophet. Nahum, Habakkuk, which was mentioned. Zephaniah, Uriah, Yirmiyah, which was mentioned. Yechezkel, Shamaya, Baruch, Neriah, Shiriah, Machsiyah, Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi, Mordechai of the Megillah. For those who are keeping track, I just mentioned 46 names. Talmud says there's 48. So here's you have the humility of Rashi, the great #1 commentary of all of Torah, and he says, and I'm not sure who the other two are. He says, the Gemara says 48. I only know of 46. I don't know who the final two are. And by the way, that's one of the ideas which we often highlight, is that Rashi, again, the most Rashi, which stands for Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, the 10th century sage and scholar, who is the most studied commentary on Torah and Talmud, he also had the humility sometimes to say, I don't know. And this is not the only time. In other situations as well, he said, I don't know. And that's why we trust everything that he does say that he did know. Because someone who can never say, I don't know, you have to suspect everything they do know as well. So therefore, the ability to say, I don't know, is critical to being able to be a good teacher. And this is what Rashi says, 2, I don't know. Now, other commentaries fill in for Rashi and say, what were the 2 that Rashi missed or that wasn't aware of? Some say Eliezer, the son of Aaron, the high priest, and Elihu ben Barachel. Okay, so these are 48 prophets. But today, actually, I want to focus on the 7 prophetesses, the 7 female prophets of the Jewish people. Who are they? And what are their stories? Okay, so we'll get to some of that. I'll jump a little bit. And the Gemara, continuing on Tractate Megillah. Very good. David says Miriam. That is 1. Correct. Should we try a few more? What's that?
Hannah.
Chana.
Isn't she?
Chana is a prophet. Correct. Prophetess. We've got 2.
Devorah.
Sarah. Very good.
Devorah.
Devorah. Very good. Esther. Very good. Oh, look at that. We're much better with the female prophets than we are with the male prophets. Okay. So we have, I think we got at least 5, maybe even 6 over here. The Gemara spells out who those prophetesses were. Interestingly, the Gemara does not spell out who the 48 prophets are. Rashi tells us that. The Gemara doesn't spell it out. It just says there are 48 prophets. I want to go back for a second, actually. And actually, here we have a very interesting Gemara. The Gemara says, were there really only 48 or 55 prophets? We have a statement. I don't want to get caught up in the verse which proves this, but there's a pasuk which says, "Vayhi eish echad min Ramasayim Tzofim." There was a man from Ramosayim Tzofim. That's the name of the city, and the Talmud extrapolates from there that Ramosayim Tzofim actually means a person who was one of 200 prophets prophesying about Israel, and that was in his generation. So then, the generation of Elkanah, the husband of Chana and Penina, actually had 2 wives. At that very time, there were 200 prophets. So what are we saying? There's only 48 prophets. We have a circumstance in which the Talmud describes 200 prophets in one era. So here you have a very important declaration of the Gemara. The Gemara says the truth is, and it's hard, by the way. All right, I'll first answer this, and then I'll clarify something. The Gemara says, Mi hava tuvahav. There were many more than 48 prophets. Kedetanya, we even have a brisa. It's taught that there were thousands of prophets who arose among the Jewish people. The only thing when we say 48 or 55, what we mean is nevuah shehutzrucha l'doros nichtava. We're talking about prophets whose prophecies not came true, were necessary for all of history. So the prophecies of Moshe, we live with till today. The prophecies of King Solomon, we live with till today. So you may have had many people who experienced prophecy, but many of their prophecies were just relevant for their time or their own personal experience. When we say 40, 55 prophets, we're talking about those whose words and whose messages reverberate throughout history. And those are those 55. So that's very important to understand. I want to share a couple things now before we move on to the 7 female prophetesses. One of them is, what is prophecy? The Rambam, Maimonides, who has a very, very practical approach to his understanding of these even mystical ideas, he says prophecy was something any person could accomplish. After a person immersed oneself completely in the wisdom of Torah and connected through Torah and through prayer, it was almost like a level one could reach. One could reach a state of prophecy, which is a certain divine wisdom, a divine knowledge that a person is able to accomplish. But there's a very interesting Gemara. And the Gemara says like this, that there was, and this answers a few questions. It says there was a period of time in which the Jewish people were immersed in idolatry. And idolatry was rampant among the people, foreign worship, worshiping idols. And most of us can't really relate to it. You read the stories of idol worship, and it doesn't seem to be something that's all that attractive. Worshiping idols, I mean, some things we understand that we can be attracted to sin and doing things wrong. But idol worship, idolatry, that doesn't really make sense. And so the Talmud says that actually there was an event that took place. Now, this is all a very mystical idea, what we're about to share. The Talmud says that the sages at a certain point recognized that the inclination to idolatry, David, you're asking what I'm about to take place was before the destruction of the first temple. It was right around the destruction of the first temple, right in that era. The sages felt that the temptation for idolatry was too strong. And they prayed to God to remove that temptation, that we should no longer be tempted. If you think about it, that which we are drawn to, that which we have desires for, don't necessarily make sense. You can't really explain certain things which we are drawn to. It doesn't make sense. It's not a logical thing. It's that we're drawn to it. Somehow in our DNA, we get drawn to certain things, whether they're right or wrong. It doesn't necessarily make sense, but we're drawn to certain things. So the sages sense that the attraction to idolatry was too strong, and the people could not handle it. They couldn't handle that test, and therefore they prayed to God to have that temptation removed, at least to a large degree removed, and they were granted that request. However, our sages tell us that alongside that request being granted, God also removed the common ability of prophecy. Can I bother you ask you to shut the door? Yeah, thank you. In other words, it's when the temptation for idolatry was removed, God also removed the common phenomena of prophecy, and it actually makes sense. In other words, God says, if you want to remove a certain obstacle, then you're also going to lose a certain gift. The gift of prophecy is going to be removed. And so therefore, right around the same time as we have that there's no longer the temptation for idolatry, which I think most of us understand, most of us are not tempted to worship idols. It's a foreign worship. Around that time, to balance things out, so to say, God says, if you're removing you're removing an obstacle, well, then I'm going to remove a spiritual gift so that life continues to have the balance of good and evil. And therefore, we don't have the idea of prophecy, which was a certain divine connection, a divine wisdom, and its highest level was a divine communication. So that too was weakened right around the same time. Okay. Now, let's go to the 7 prophetesses. Who are they? Says the Gemara, Shava Nevios Ma'ninhu. Who are the 7 prophetesses? So most of them are already listed. Sarah. Interesting, we have 4 mothers of the Jewish people. Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. But only Sarah is listed as a prophet. Miriam, the sister of Moshe. Devorah, who was a judge of the Jewish people. Devorah. Chana, who was mentioned, the mother of Samuel. Abigail, and that's a less known figure, but hopefully we'll get to some of her story. Who is Abigail? Anyone knows the story? We know Abigail is a common Jewish name nowadays, but who is Abigail? What's her story? I see a little bit of a light bulb over there. Light bulb.
She was hired to keep
I'm sorry?
King David warm. She was hired to keep King David warm. Was that?
No, that's someone else. That's not this Abigail. Was that young lady also named Abigail? He just mentioned the lady at the end of David's life. It says there was a young woman who was when he was elderly, who was hired to assist him as an assistant, keep him warm. It says, but anyway, that's not the Abigail over here.
What's the general?
It is the general timeline of David and Melech.
Wait, wasn't that one sister or something? And then no.
We'll see. Then there's Huldah the prophetess. And the final one, which was mentioned, is Esther. So Sarah, Miriam, Dvorah, Chana, Abigail, Huldah, Esther. 7. No, Bathsheba. Fine. Now the Torah, the Talmud goes on to say, what are the stories of these 7 women? Where do we see their prophecy? Some are more obvious than others. So the first one is Sarah. Sarah was a prophet. Dichsiv. As the pasuk says, the first time we come across Sarah, she's not even called Sarah. She's called Yiska. Avi Milka va'avi Yiska. It says it describes Nachor, I guess, as the father of Milka and the father of Yiska. And Va'amar Rabbi Yitzchak said Yiska is actually Sarah. Yiska, who's mentioned in the Torah, is another name for Sarah. The Lama Nikra Shema Yiska. Why was she called Yiska? Because Yiska is connected to vision. Shesachsa beruach hakodesh. She had holy vision and inspiration. She was able to see. Where do we see Sarah's connection to God? So one of the most important bits of marriage advice in the Torah. And that is that when Sarah and Avraham, you have Sarah and Abraham who have a disagreement. What do they have a disagreement about? They have a disagreement about their son Yishmael. It's actually Abraham's son. Abraham has a son Yishmael from Hagar. That was Sarah's idea. Let's go back a little bit. Sarah doesn't have children. Sarah says to Abraham, you know what? I guess you're not going to have children through me. You can have children through my maidservant, Hagar. So why don't you have relations with Hagar and have children, have a child, and that'll be like a child through me. That's what Abraham does. And she, in fact, Hagar becomes pregnant and gives birth to, eventually, Yishmael. Yishmael Yishmael grows up, and Yishmael was a wild man. Sometime later, Sarah is blessed with a child herself. Who's that? That's Yitzchak. So now you have Yishmael and Yitzchak growing up in the house together. Yishmael is 13 years older than Yitzchak. And at some point, Sarah looks out and sees that Yitzchak's half-brother, Yishmael, is causing problems. Different discussions of what that means. He was actually threatening him, or perhaps just trying to corrupt him.
He used to bully him.
There's different interpretations of what exactly Yishmael was doing. Some say it was more than bullying. He was actually trying to harm him. And Sarah says to Avraham, send Yishmael away. Send Yishmael away from the house. And Avraham says, why? I'd rather not. Let's try working with him. Let's try fixing the problem. And that's when God comes to Avraham and says the famous words, Kol asher tomer elecha Sarah shma bekola. Whatever Sarah tells you to do, listen. That's it. Whatever Sarah tells you to do, you should listen. Got to be careful. If you marry a woman named Sarah, she could really pull this off on you. She basically says, there you go. Whatever Sarah says, you got to listen. It's directly in the Torah. So therefore, from here you see, the Gemara says this proves that Sarah had a direct connection with God, and therefore Abraham is told to follow whatever Sarah says. Fine. The Gemara then goes on to the second person. Who is the second female prophet? Miriam. Where do we see Miriam's prophecy? We come across Moshe's prophecy a lot. Where do we come across Miriam's prophecy? So actually there's several sources. There's a source much later in which God speaks directly to Miriam, but the earliest prophecy of Miriam was much earlier. The pasuk says, later in the Torah, when it comes to the song, right? The Jewish people cross the Red Sea and they sing a song. The song is the Az Yashir. After the men sing, it says the women sing. Who leads the women in song? Miriam. And over there it states clearly, Vatikach Miriam Haneviah. Miriam, the prophetess, Achos Aharon, the sister of Aaron. She takes the drum, the timbrel in her hand, and she leads all the women in song. So you have Moshe leading the men in song, his sister Miriam leading the women in song, and the Torah says clearly, Miriam Hanaviah, Miriam the prophetess. The Gemara says, but there seems to be a pretty obvious question over here. Miriam is the sister of whom? She's the sister to who? Moshe and Aaron, right? And yet over here, not here, in the Torah it says, Miriam, the sister of Aaron, takes the music, takes the instrument. Why the sister of Aaron? Why not the sister of Moshe? Or the sister of Moshe and Aaron? Seems to be a pretty obvious question. Moshe. Was she not the sister of Moshe? So Gemara answers by sharing a fascinating story. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Rav Nachman Yitzchak answers. You know why she's referred to as the sister of Aaron and not the sister of Moshe? Because she prophesied as a child when she was only the sister of Aaron. When was she only the sister of Aaron? When Moshe wasn't yet born. She prophesied before Moshe was born. And that's why it says the prophet, the sister of Aaron, to hint to us that her prophecy took place before Moshe even existed, when she was only the sister of Aaron. What was the prophecy? The prophecy is like this. So let's take a step into one of the more famous stories of the Torah and share a little bit about it. The Torah says that Paro issues a decree and says that all of the Jewish boys should be thrown into the river and killed. One of the leaders of the Jewish people at the time was a man named Amram. And Amram, who was one of the leaders, said, all right, if there's such a horrible decree, then I'm going to separate from my wife. I'll divorce, because why would I bring children into a world to be killed? Why would I bring children into the world to be killed? This Amram at that point had two children. This is Amram and Yocheved had two children. He had a son and a daughter. He had a son named Aaron, and he had a daughter named Miriam. And he separates from his wife. The Jewish people followed in the lead of their leader, and they also separated from their wives. At this point, there was only one person who protested. And who was that? That was his little daughter, Miriam. Miriam protested. How? She basically said, little child, but apparently she already at that point experienced prophecy. The Omeres, and she said, Asida imi. She said to her parents, I have a knowledge, I have a vision. I have a vision that my mother, Asida imi, I see in the future that my mother, Shetele Bain, she's going to give birth to a son, Sheyoshia et Yisrael, who's going to save the Jewish people. Now, as a father of little children, I say I don't necessarily buy into everything my 5, 6, 7-year-old says, but apparently this was different, and apparently Amram sensed that his daughter wasn't just saying something, but he sensed that there was a certain divinity to her message, and so therefore he remarried. He remarried his wife. That's, if you look in the Torah, it seems strange because the Torah says, and a man named Amram married, Bas Levi married his wife Yocheved, and then they gave birth to Moshe, which doesn't make sense. So they already had 2 kids. How could it mean that he goes and marries her? They were married before, but now we understand, because even though they were married before, he had separated, and now now he remarried her. He remarried his wife.
So he divorced her, not separated.
He divorced her. Yes, he divorced. I mean, then this is before the Torah was given, so the process perhaps was different. But you're right. He divorced her and then remarried her. Thank you. Correct. And then they conceived and gave birth to a son. And when that boy was born, Bishal Shanolat, when Moshe was born, this baby Moses, right? Although he wasn't named Moses yet, because who gave him the name Moses? That was the princess Batya. So a little boy was born. Nismala Habayas Kule Ora. And the entire house was filled with light. Clearly, this was an unusual child. When that happened, Omad Aviha, the father stood up, Amram, Vinoshka al Rosh, and kissed his daughter on her head. Amar, and he said to her, Biti, my daughter, Niskaima Nivuase, your prophecy has come true. But then what happens next? They can't keep the son. The decree is still in full effect. Pharaoh's decree. But then when they have to send Moshe into the river in a basket, and now we all know how things worked out. But at the time, you got to picture putting a newborn baby into a basket. You basically felt, in all likelihood, that's the end of the baby. And someone's going to find the baby and get rid of them, or the baby's not going to survive. So when that happened, that same father stood up, the Tavcha Roisha, and hit her on her head. Or Tavcha literally means that, struck her on her head. The Amar Allah, and he said to her, Biti, my daughter, where's your prophecy? Suddenly that prophecy doesn't look all that good anymore. You prophesy a baby's going to be born, the house lit up, it seems all good. But now this prophecy seems to be going down the river. So what's with your prophecy? Right, literally. Where's your prophecy? Now, this is the deeper meaning of the verse in the Torah, which says, that his sister, in the Torah, it says he put him in a basket and set him into the river. And then it says, and his sister, right, was watching from the side, meirachak, from the distance, ledeya, to know. The Torah says that, right? So in all the stories, we know about the sister standing and watching as the baby goes off in the basket, the baby Moshe in the basket. Why was she standing there? On a simple level, it is, well, because she was his sister. Okay. What about his brother? He had a brother, Aaron. Why wasn't he standing? And what about Moshe and what about his parents? Why weren't they standing? Yeah, Aaron is also born. Aaron is older. Why wasn't he standing there? Exactly. He was also born before the decree. Yes. Miriam was 5 or 6 years older than Moshe, and Aaron was 3 years old. So why wasn't he standing there? The answer is because she was standing to know. Again, now we read the verse. Again, this is in Exodus chapter 2, verse number 4. She was his sister was standing from the distance to know. It's more than just standing because she was watching her brother. She was trying to figure out what happened to that prophecy. She knew that it was real. She knew that it was more than just her imagination. And therefore, she truly wondered, where did this go wrong? And that's why she watched, because she believed in the truth of her prophecy. And then she got to see, even as the basket went on, that someone collected the basket, and she was there in place to help Batya to direct her what to do with the baby. So now we understand what it means, Ladea, to know. It's not just to know what's going to take place. She wanted to know what happened to the prophecy. Ladas ma yehei b'sof nevuos. What's going to be with the prophecy that she sent? All this brings us back to the fact that Miriam is a prophet, one of the 7 female prophets. Again, there may have been many, many more, but one of the 7 whose prophecies continue and throughout history. And it also answers why when Miriam goes and after in the splitting of the sea, and she takes all the women, leads them in song, it says Miriam, the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, because her prophecy took place before Moshe even existed. Okay, I see some comments over here. David says she rebuked her father. Correct. All right. Tevarim 10:12. That's another prophecy. You're talking about after she rebuked Moshe. Correct. All right. So that's prophetess. We've gone through 2 of them, Sarah and Miriam. We have some more time. Let's go to the next one. The next one is Devorah. Devorah is perhaps, I wouldn't say the most famous, but her leadership, one of the most unique leaders of the Jewish people, female leaders of the Jewish people, was Devorah. And she wrote a song, the Song of Devorah, which we read the same Shabbos that we read the Az Yashir. In the Haftorah, we read the Song of Devorah. So, what's the story of Devorah? So, for those who want to follow in a Tanakh, this is in the book of Malachim. I'm sorry, the book of Shoftim, Judges 4.4. So, we have this period of in between the leadership of Moshe and Joshua, and then at some point it goes to the leadership of Samuel, and then David and Saul, the kings of the Jewish people, Shaul, David, Shlomo, Saul, David, Solomon. You have a period of history, a few hundred years, in which the Jewish people were led by the Shoftim. The Shoftim are the judges. And this is different people who were judges of the Jewish people. They didn't have the status of king, but they were judges. Samson, for example, was one of the judges of the Jewish people. And during this era, one of the judges was a female judge. Her name was Devorah. Devorah, who was a prophetess, the wife of Lapidos. Her husband's name was Lapidos. Her name was Devorah, and she was the prophet of one of the prophets. After Moshe, well after Moshe. She was again during that era. Yeah, there was before Solomon. Again, from when the Jewish people entered the land of Israel, it was approximately 400 years before the temple was built under the kingdom of David. So you have those years under the leadership. So Joshua led the Jewish people in, and then you have the judges. And judges often were response to conflicting times of the Jewish people. There's a whole book. One of the books of the Torah is called the Book of Judges. It's during that period. So again, Shimshon is probably the most famous of them. Samson, during that era. Samson, who battled the Philistines and was taken into captivity. Where?
They burned his wife, right?
They killed him. He killed himself by taking down a whole building. But where was Samson taken into captivity? Anyone knows?
Philistines.
What's that?
Land of Philistines.
More specifically?
Palestine.
Not Palestine, land of Philistines. Where? Gaza. He was taken into Gaza. That's where Samson was taken into captivity, and eventually we studied this in the Gemara a few some time back. There was a big party celebrating his captivity, and he took the pillars of the building and took down the whole building, took down the house with himself and everyone in it as a final display of strength. Anyways, that's just for some Gaza history. All right. So Devorah was one of the unfortunately, yeah. Devorah was a prophet, the wife of Lapidos. Why Ashes Lapidos? Why is it necessary to tell us the wife of Lapidos? After all, she was a judge. We don't need to know. It's not as if Lapidos was a very, I'm sure he was a special person, a holy person, but he doesn't seem to be very influential in Jewish history. So why, when talking about Devorah, does it mention who her husband was? So Gemara says there's an allusion to a merit that she had, which helped propel her to prophecy. What was the merit that she had? Shahaisa Lapidos is connected to the word Lapid. One of the, you have till today in Israel, Lapid is a name. What does Lapid mean? Lapid is a flame. So Lapidos is an allusion to what she did, which was shahaisa oisa pesilos lamikdash. She used to make the wicks for the tabernacle for the menorah. That's what she did. She took upon herself to make the wicks for the tabernacle, and because of that, she was merited. She dedicated her life to helping the bring light to the menorah. See, Hanukkah's coming up; it all connects. Therefore, she merited the gift of prophecy, which is light and wisdom, because she brought light to the menorah. Therefore, she merited. What does it say about Devorah? That she was a judge. She was a leader of the Jewish people. And how would she lead the Jewish people? V'hi yosheves tachas tomer. She sat under the palm tree. She sat under a palm tree. Why does the Torah tell us that she sat under a palm tree? Why is that necessary? Yosheves tachas tomer. So the Gemara says two answers. One answer is Amar of Shimon ben Avshalom. Shimon ben Avshalom said, Mishum Yichud. Yichud is a prohibition. It's a rabbinic prohibition, but it's a prohibition against men and women secluding themselves. Men and women who are forbidden to one another, a married man, married woman, but forbidden to be secluded. A man is not allowed to be secluded with a woman who's not his wife, unless it's a family member, an immediate family member. But otherwise, it is forbidden for a man and woman to be secluded with one another. So here you have a unique situation in which Devorah is the judge. People come to her with all sorts of questions, the Jewish people, which can lead to circumstances in which the people, the men, and typically it was the men who would come to ask the questions, which could lead to circumstances in which it could be an inappropriate setting. So for that reason, she did something, and the Torah records that to let us know this, to record her modesty, and that is she sat under a palm tree. Because why? The palm tree is unique because the palm tree's branches are very high. So therefore, there's no seclusion under a palm tree. Some trees, you have seclusion. You're hiding, you could hide behind branches of a tree. You can't hide behind the palm tree. Palm tree is high up in the air, and therefore it provides some shade, but otherwise it is open for everyone to see. And therefore she arranged that in her situational leadership, she sat by the palm tree so that anyone who would come, it would be an open setting, and there wouldn't be any. As we know, nowadays and always, people are always looking for ways to spread rumors about leaders in particular. So a leader is fair game. You become a leader, you become a fair game to rumors and to speculation and to accusations. She said, "I want to steer clear of any accusations, certainly in the field in the area of immodesty, and therefore I will sit under a tree where there's no seclusion, and therefore anybody who comes to me will be in a very public setting." Davar acher, another perhaps more symbolic idea to the idea of the palm tree is there's something unique about the palm tree. Ma tamar zeh, a palm tree, ein lo ela lev echad, only has one heart. What does it mean palm tree has one heart? So the Rashi explains the sap of a palm tree only flows up to its trunk, as opposed to the sap of other trees flow into the branches. So there's a certain unity, a certain oneness to a palm tree, and she said, just as the palm tree represents oneness, Af Yisrael Shabbat Sadar, so to the Jewish people of that generation of Devorah, Lo haya lahem el lev echad, they only had one heart. In other words, they had one commitment to their Father in heaven, just as the palm tree has only one heart, has only a single commitment. So that is the prophecy of Devorah. We'll share one more, and with that one conclude. We're not going to get to Avigail, which is a very interesting story. Maybe we'll get to that next week. You did look it up. What's that? You weren't sure. All right. Yeah, Avigail is not a well-known story. You know what? Let me jump to Avigail, actually. Let me jump to Avigail because it's actually a fascinating story. So I'm going to skip Chana. Chana is another one of the prophetesses. Very important. Chana is the mother of Samuel, mother of Shmuel. And we learn many laws of prayer from Chana's prayer. But I'm going to jump to the next one, the story of Avigail, which is a very strange story, a very fascinating story. So what's the story of Avigail? The story of Avigail is recorded in the book of Shmuel, Shmuel 1, chapter 25, verse number 20. At that point, you had a young man, the future king of the Jewish people, whose name is David. David. And David at that point is on the run from Shaul HaMelech. He is the son-in-law of King Saul and the future king of the Jewish people. And he's already been anointed, which is important because And the idea of a Jewish king was one who was anointed with a special oil. He has been anointed by Shmuel already at this point. So it's almost as if it's not just that he's potentially the next king. He is anointed. He is already in line to be the next king of the Jewish people, which Shaul, his father-in-law, is very upset about. But nonetheless, it's already destined to be the king. At this point,
Was the Shekinah already on with him?
to some degree, yes. I mean, to some degree, that I don't know if this may have been. I'm not sure if you're referring to the point in which Shmuel tells Shaul HaMelech that the kingdom has been torn from you and given to David. I don't know if this is before or after that point. I don't know yet. But at this point, David HaMelech already is a leader in his own right, although not the king. And he sends 10 men to a man named Naval. And Naval, who was very wealthy, and the king's David HaMelech, not yet the king, but he sends 10 men to Naval, saying, tell Naval to provide food for David and his men. Naval, who is a wealthy, arrogant man, refuses them. And he disgraces David. And he says, Miza David, who is David? Who is the son of Yishai? The ultimate shame says, I don't even know who you are. Who are you? Right? That's the, I don't even know who you are. David heard about this. He got very upset. And he gathered his people and he said, let everyone take their sword. We're going to go to battle against this Naval. And he took his men and prepared to go to Naval, who he felt was deserving of death because of his disrespect to the king. And who saved the day? Naval's wife. Naval's wife, Abigail, heard about what was about to take place. And it says she heard that David was heading toward her. So she gathered a tremendous amount of food, put it onto a wagon, and headed in the direction of David to appease him. And over here, the Gemara goes on to say, so the Gemara says, what's the story? Verse, this is from Shmuel, Shmuel Aleph, Perek Chafei. The pasuk says, "V'haya hiro cheves al hachamor," and she was riding on the donkey. The yoredes b'seiser hahar, and she came down on the dark side of the mountain. So we're out of time, but I'll just say that she approached David, and she said to him, basically said, "You've issued a judgment against. Firstly, here's the food. Here's the food. You wanted food for your people. Here it is. You issued judgment against my husband without giving a proper judgment against him. He deserves a fair case. You can't just come and kill him. He deserves a proper court case." To which David HaMelech said, and I'm abbreviating the Gemara over here. If you want, you could check it up on your own. This is Tractate Megillah 14b. David HaMelech says, no, there's a certain grievance which causes a person to forfeit their life, and that is a traitor to the crown. If you're a traitor to the crown, moed b'malchus, then you forfeit your right to a proper court case. To which she said, you're not yet the crown. She said, you're not yet the crown. Maybe you're destined to be the crown, but your father-in-law Shaul is still alive. And therefore, you have no right to say that his denial of food for you and your people is a traitor to the crown. And basically, she continued to have this back and forth dialogue with David HaMelech until David HaMelech acquiesced and said, okay, you've convinced me. I'm not going to go to battle against Naval. What's interesting, though, is that ultimately her husband does die and David HaMelech marries her. He doesn't kill her. It's not the story of Bathsheba. This is not where he caused her death, but ultimately she does. Her husband dies, and I guess David HaMelech was so impressed with this encounter that when that happens, he does marry this Abigail. All right, we'll stop here. So we've covered a couple of the stories of the prophets of the Jewish people. And again, let our Torah study today be in the merit of the Jewish people, the merit of the state of Israel, and the soldiers there, and those who are still in captivity, may they be returned safely. We are going to do Ma'ariv now. And then please join us downstairs for some refreshments. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you,